Namaskar, everyone. So today the is session number 3 of Tantra, the science of Tantra Yoga, and the focus is cross-cultural views on meditation. Now, it's not going to be, before we start, I'm gonna say that I am definitely not an expert of any other contemplative traditions, like say Eastern, even like the Western ones. I know a little bit about Buddhism. I know a little bit about other, you can say, Eastern traditions, like a little bit about Taoism, Hinduism, but by no means I'm a specialist in any of these areas. And I'm mostly drawing on two readings on this one. One is, well, I'll provide them in the very end. There are two books that I'm quoting, but basically the field is quite new of contemplative studies. It's a different cross-cultural view of what different contemplative traditions are, what meditation practices are, and another one is specifically on the Eastern contemplative traditions. So again, the scope of my presentation is quite limited, but I think it's a good foundational way to look at those things. And again, by no means I'm a professional in this. I have delved into Tantra yogic path more, and I've read other yogic texts outside of the Ananda Marga tradition, some foundational basic classical Indian philosophy. Like there are 6 schools. Again, not an expert, but I think we can have like some interesting starting point here. So the goal of this session is to just kind of look at meditation, not just from the perspectives of Tantra and yoga, but try to look at it from other different perspectives as well to get a better understanding. So roughly the contents, just compare and see various perspectives on what is meditation, what does it consist of, what are the goals, what techniques exist. And some of the other major perspectives are yogic, Buddhist, indigenous, and secular ones. In further sessions, if you've seen the syllabus, further down, we will talk about other perspectives on what meditation is, from the psychological standpoints, from the standpoints of neuroscience, from some of the more Western research-based perspectives. And this is just to get a better understanding and appreciation for it, because there are different ways to view what meditation is. And even the word meditation, as we will see, it's a westernized word, right? So to begin with, I'm taking this perspective of contemplative studies, which is a new field, and we will get to know about it more. So this book is by Kom Jati, 2018. So again, it's quite recent. So contemplative studies is an emerging interdisciplinary field dedicated to research and education on contemplative practice and contemplative experience, including the possible relevance and application to a wide variety of undertakings. Contemplative studies refers to the study and practice of contemplation, but the name is increasingly being used to designate the emerging field, the contemplative movement. Contemplative practice and contemplative experience are the primary focus and shared interest. It encompasses approaches and practices more commonly referred to as meditation, prayer, and cognate disciplines. Japesh, can you read this one, please? Purpose statement.
Recognizing but even going beyond modern movement awareness practices, members of contemplative studies tend to understand contemplative practice in terms of a specific approach, an approach that may be applied to and expressed in almost any activity. This includes art, dance, writing, photography, research, teaching, theater, walking, and so forth. That is, as discussed below. The interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, even transdisciplinary dimension of contemplative studies may include almost any undertaking, area of interest, or field of inquiry. The field is also closely connected with contemplated pedagogy, or teaching and learning informed by and perhaps expressed as contemplative practice. While these are sometimes conflated, contemplative studies, in my way of thinking, encompasses contemplative pedagogy. Contemplative pedagogy is one expression of contemplative studies, perhaps, albeit an essential one.
Okay, thank you. So that's an interesting quote here by a Dutch psychologist in his influential contemplative psychology. Psychology of religion of being used in the conventional sense about is a form of what is nowadays called third person psychology. Psychology in the third person is about other people, about him, her, or them. It has other people as its subject of study. Contemplative psychology, however, focuses rather strongly on personal experience as it occurs to me or us. While also accepting the approach of a third-person psychology, contemplative psychology comprises of a first-person psychology and methodology that includes subjectivity or private experience, which is a very interesting observation, I think. And that's why lots of Western philosophers talk about this branch of science that is called phenomenology. And phenomenology is basically the study of, similar to, you can say, cognitive psychology, in that it focuses on perception, on our experiences, what I experience, what I feel, how I experience it. It basically is a very interesting way to, it's an interesting branch of, I would say, philosophy. And here it's an interesting thing. It's basically introspection, seeing what happens to you, to me. Okay, who wants to read the next one? Madovidya, maybe you, and then Max, and then Ekamati.
Sure. For the moment, we may note that this line of inquiry is not just knowledge about, but knowledge of and from. In addition to practice, commitment, and critical subjectivity, members of the field generally recognize and emphasize the beneficial and transformative effects of contemplative practice. These extend from positive psychosomatic changes to forms of socio-political engagement and application, including action directed towards increased peace and social justice.
I think this is like more of why practice, why to do it. Again, in yoga, we say self-realization and service to all, and here, increased peace, social justice, and psychosomatic changes, so well-being. Okay, so here it's an interesting model because it said it's interdisciplinary, means that it's connected to different other fields. So contemplative practice studies basically, it's a conglomeration of peace studies, creative arts, humanities, social sciences, religious communities, hard sciences, clinical sciences, and education. So Max, if you want to read, you can read on the right this little comment.
Yeah, just a sec. While contemplative studies empower individuals, larger claims about contemplative practice and contemplative experience are open to discussion and debate. Ruff also helpfully outlines some interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary trajectories, which he places in the categories of the creative arts, the humanities, and the sciences.
So in terms of contemplative studies, a straightforward history of the field would probably begin with events of the in 2000s. So basically, precursor is the 90s or possibly 1960s. So here they're talking about, they're going to talk about it a little bit further, but basically the Eastern teachers come from the East to the West and they start to teach the Euro-Americans, you know, these demographics of America, those contemplative practices. So it's a primarily American movement pioneered by, you know, those primarily white scholars, but there's an increasing awareness and interest more on among different scholars right now. And I think this field will be more and more increasing. Yeah, engagement with the ethnic theories and critical race theory. So this is just a little bit about history, and I'm not sure we should go into details that much, but again, and it's an interesting, one of the interesting events is the immigration law in the 1965, quarter-based restrictions on Asian immigration, and then larger cultural trends, you know, the sex revolution in the 1960s, an influx of Asian immigrant teachers, an influx of general teachers who basically practice and teach Buddhism and Hinduism. And then such techniques as transcendental meditation, vipassana, zazen emerged in the West as well in these years. So this also corresponded to the Second Vatican Council in 62 to 65, which is something I completely didn't know about in the Roman Catholic Church, the Seminal Nostra Aetate in Our Time Declaration, and basically an increasing call for interreligious dialogue. So kind of people of different confessions, religions, and traditions start to have more an open dialogue and stop being more secluded. As you can see, here's like the graphic representation. So the 1960s counterculture, Western Buddhism, meditation research, critical pedagogy, hybrid spirituality, and all of this kind of adds up to this contemplative studies inception. Ekamati, can you read this one, please?
Sure. Critique of various dimensions of the American education system. Some perceived deficiencies include careerism, competitiveness, corporatization, homogenization, hyper-intellectualism, instrumentalism, opportunism, rankism, scientism, science as religion, technocracy, and so forth.
So obviously this is kind of a little bit out of context here, but just I think why it stood out to me while I was preparing for this is because this is the context for like the inception of this contemplative studies. And to varying degrees, those things affect the perception of contemplative education in the West and overall.
Sorry, Nirmal, can I ask you what's the difference between meritocratic thinking and rankism? Are they the same thing?
I'm not an expert for sure, but I would say yes.
Okay, so it's like the same ballpark. Okay.
I would say yeah. Because meritocracy in my personal view is a good thing, right? Mostly because basically merit plays an important part. So there's this incentive to utilize your personal strengths and talents to the greatest degree possible. Whereas rankism, I'm not sure what that would be, like nepotism, something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're taking this out of context, it can get too theoretical and impractical. So yeah. So the second part, the second chapter of this book, they're talking about contemplative practice. And contemplative practice refers to various approaches, disciplines, and methods for developing attentiveness, awareness, compassion, concentration, presence, wisdom, and the like. So possible connective strands or family resemblances include attentiveness, awareness, interiority, presence, silence, transformation, and a deepened sense of meaning and purpose. So all of these different things, we can say, for example, in Tantra yoga, there's this word of sadhana, which means like this effort to complete oneself, this synonym for spiritual practice, which includes meditation, but is not but extends to other forms of service also in the external world for striving for social justice and peace, for example. On the most basic level, contemplative practice is a more encompassing comparative category with some rough equivalence to meditation. However, unlike meditation, which sometimes implies seated postures and which is often reduced to Buddhist meditation, contemplative practice functions as a larger category. In terms of religious traditions, it encompasses meditation and contemplative practice. However, meditation also relates to other practices in art and education, and because I think it's an important idea to understand, because in this field you can be contemplative not only when you close your eyes and do say formal meditation technique. That's what people say. Okay, I'm eating mindfully, I'm like talking mindfully, I have like mindful relationships, I have mindful this, mindful that. So everything in a way through this lens can be a contemplative practice, depending on who's talking and to whom they're talking. Japesh, can you read this one, please? What is meditation? Religious, Christian, mystic perspectives.
In religious studies, meditation serves as a comparative category, usually without a strict definition. In the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, meditation and contemplation have more technical meanings. Etymologically speaking, Meditation and contemplation relate to the Latin meditatio, to think over, to consider, and contemplatio, to look at, to observe, respectively. In Catholic monastic contexts and Catholic influenced forms of contemplative practice, the terms most often relate to types of prayer, with prayer having four aspects or stages. 1, prayerful or holy reading. 2, meditation or reflection on specific topics. 3, an inward, silent, or vocal response to God's message or presence.
Interesting. So we don't really know, I don't know much about the Catholic perspective, the Christian perspective, but apparently meditation also relates to these forms of thinking over, considering. So what is meditation? Madhavidi, can you read this one, please? This is a Buddhist perspective more.
Important technical terms used to designate contemplative practice as herein employed include bhavana, Pali, development, a Buddhist term for meditation or mental development, contemplatio, to look at, to observe, a Christian term for maintaining silent awareness of God, dazuo, seated meditation, Chinese and Taoist term for meditation, broadly understood and an umbrella category for various specific practices. Dhyana, Sanskrit, concentration, a Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain term for concentration or meditative states. Hesychia, stillness, a Christian term for stillness, seclusion, and inner prayer. Hitbo de Bud, Hebrew, mental seclusion.
So again, different concepts across different cultures have slightly different meanings. And I think also because in this field, they're kind of taking it a little bit out of context. You know, maybe the meanings can be distorted because they're taken outside of the practices themselves and the context. So that's just my kind of apprehension about this approach.
I would like to give a comment on Christianity real quick. One of the best ways of explaining the idea of prayers from the point of view of Christians is that God in the Christian mind is very similar to essentially the astral Brahman, or the greater good, as I like to call it. And you are expected to have a direct conversation to him. And only in the rarest of circumstances are you essentially going to have an epiphany and God talks back to you, in which case you're considered a saint and you have to prove that you're not insane, you're actually hearing God. It's a very big deal in the Catholic Church if you claim to hear God. So essentially, if in meditation, as we know it here, it's about having a bit of a more intimate connection without speaking, in Christianity, prayer and talk is the method of communication.
Yeah, that's interesting because how do you not know? Because say, in Tantra and in yoga and largely in Hinduism, the idea that whatever you're doing, you are basically talking with God because everybody is God, an expression of God. So there's never a disconnection through Him if you're in a state of mind, and nothing is profane, everything is in a way sacred, in every way sacred. So interesting how they would say in Orthodox Church. Of course, I don't know the canon or anything like this, but how do you, how do you, how do you say appraise what you hear in your mind is not your own illusion or delusion or hallucination and cognitive distortion? What
There
is
are
right? Yeah.
some methodologies developed over time for it because it's not the first nor the last time there have been false prophets, and they have an entire book, a manual on how to do it, including for stigmata, listening to gods, levitation, and mystical events. It's a very deep hole. We can talk about it another time.
Yes, it's well. Anyways, it's again, it's cultural. It's based on culture, right? Even the book, it's nothing but an expression of culture, and people like scholars, time per time, they go through this. But practically speaking, it's about the experience that people get. And in this field, I like that they're talking about this idea of experience. So What is meditation? A Jewish term for secluded inward prayer, jhana, and the Pali equivalent of dhyana. Muraqaba, to watch over in Arabic, an Islamic term for Sufi contemplation. Shoyui, guarding the one, a classical Taoist technical term for apophatic meditation that eventually became a general category for meditation broadly understood. I really like this Shoyuki, guarding the one. The meaning is really close to the yogic one as well. Theoria, the Greek equivalent of contemplatio, yoga, to yoke and unite by extension, a principally Hindu term for spiritual discipline and aimed at liberation. Of course, in Tantra yoga, we will not accept something saying, okay, this is a Hindu term. Rather, yoga is something on its own, and Hinduism is just something that kind of builds itself on Tantra and yoga. But anyways, it's a personal comment. And Zazen means sitting dhyana, a Buddhist term for Zen meditation, and so forth. And arguably the word Zen came from Tian, from Zen, from Chen, from Tian. This is quite interesting. So types of contemplative practices, major types of contemplative practices. Again, this is just his way to create this taxonomy, this categorization, but it's interesting. Alchemical, apophatic, attentional, communal, concentrative, devotional, dualistic, ecstatic, and static, ergotropic, and so on and so forth. We can just look through. I came up with different definitions. So the first one, alchemical, which include certain tantric and yogic practices, believe it or not, are complex physiological techniques, usually involving stage-based training aimed at self-transformation and or divinization. Alchemical methods usually utilize an energetic view of personhood, emphasizing prana, chi, lung, and similar concepts. So that's very interesting. Apparently, you can call Tantra yoga an alchemical way because it is self-transformation. Apophatic techniques emphasize non-conceptual and contentless states of consciousness, often with an implied skepticism concerning linguistic and intellectual categories. So this, of course, will be a Buddhist approach to it because yeah, just because that's what the aspiration towards. They don't talk about the concept of God because they don't want to be lost in different linguistic or intellectual frames. Attentional mindfulness methods emphasize open awareness or observation of phenomena without discrimination. Communal techniques are those practiced by a group of community or a community within a communal framework. Concentrative practices emphasize focused consciousness. They may be with support or without support, objectless. Devotional techniques involve affective adoration of or focus on a specific person or object. Dualistic practice emphasizes an unbridgeable distinction between the adherent and the sacred, or the practitioner and the world. They tend to conceptualize practice in terms of relationships. I think this is quite interesting. Ecstatic techniques are those for which the practitioners go beyond or outside of themselves. This usually involves higher levels of physiological activity, ergotropic, and assumes a transcendental view of the sacred in terms of religiously committed practice. So I think you can see that some practices that we do, that the Nanda Margis do, for example, they kind of have embody many of those principles to varying degrees. Ergotropic methods involve hyperarousal. These are techniques characterized by high levels of physiological activity with different senses activated in different types of ergotropic contemplative practices. So actually when we do Larita Marmika or Kirtan, we actually move. We don't create hyperarousal, but some sort of type of activity for all senses. Kataphatic practices emphasize conceptual and content-based states of consciousness, which usually includes optimism concerning linguistic and intellectual categories. Kinesthetic means physical movement. Mantic techniques are characterized by divinational, magical, or prophetic dimension. They involve invocation and ritual. Mantric practices utilize a sound, syllable, or phrase which are usually considered sacred or efficacious. Some mantra-based techniques consider the sacred as vibratory in nature, and mantric methods may be invocational. Yeah, so there are so many more. There are mediumistic techniques are those that for which adherents enter the altered states wherein a god or spirit takes possession of them, voluntary possession. They involve divine communication and or channelizing. Mystical practices emphasize mystical experience or experience of the sacred as defined by the individual practitioner community. Quietistic are characterized by non-conceptual, contentless awareness with silence, stillness, and emptiness, while respiratory with breath, secular and non-religious practices, which are usually appropriated from religious traditions, purged of religious content, and reconceptualized according to modern materialistic, medicalized, and or psychologized views. Like mindfulness-based stress reduction, for example, this entire mindfulness movement is just that. It's a distillation of the Buddhist practice and philosophy. And solitary techniques are practiced by an individual in solitude or isolation. Now, this is the tree of contemplative practices, which is quite interesting. So communion and connection awareness, stillness, generative, creative, activist, relational movement. There is centering, there is silence, quieting the mind, meditation, loving kindness meditation, beholding, visualization, lectio divina. Music and singing is a part of like creative contemplative arts, improvisation. Then activist could be a pilgrimage, could be work and volunteering, vigil and marches bearing witness, can be relational, counsel, circle, dialogue, deep listening, storytelling, arguably arts therapy, movement, walking meditation, labyrinth walking, yoga, dance, aikido, martial arts, qigong, ritual and cyclical, establishing in a sacred personal space, retreats, ceremonies and rituals. Well, arguably retreats could be in the communal, right? So this is just one way to organize it, right?
So the overlap is intentional between certain things.
I have no clue. I have no clue. I think it's just an interesting way it's just an artistic way to do it, right? It's just one way to conceptualize it.
I'm also thinking about the previous list. There were a lot of them that, although were somewhat distinguished, they did have some overlap. Like mystical and alchemical are to me very similar in nature. In fact, everything alchemical is considered to be mystical. So differentiating them feels weird.
It's subjective, right?
Yeah.
Should be. Should be. Should be. And also it's an interdisciplinary field, so lots of overlaps are bound to happen. But also alchemical is the word that comes from the Western spiritual approach to experiencing life. It's like Western way. It's also Christian, influenced by Christianity, right?
Well, to be more specific, it's a combination of Islamic early science and Renaissance era concepts before there was a scientifically developed concept of chemistry. But it is an interesting concept and overall, there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and to me it's weird that they're saying that Tantra yoga falls under this category and not under mysticism. So it's all very debatable, but I think it's just an overall interesting way to conceptualize it. Again, these are just people trying to make sense of the world. Nobody knows the truth. So it's thus important to acknowledge the multifaceted nature of contemplative practice. We should not reduce contemplative practice to method or technique. Instead, we may be attentive to at least the following dimensions. Again, subjectively, these dimensions are important to the author. So prerequisites to the practice is community, ethical foundations, instruction and training, initiation and ordination into some technique, to preserve the quality of the knowledge of the practice and make sure that the practitioner can get the results. Another one is lineage or tradition, and place, resources, teachers, and time. Everything is relevant, of course, and important. So the second one is posture, lying down, moving and walking, sitting and standing, breathing, regulated, unregulated, technique, style, individual, communal, lay, monastic, vocal, silent, duration and format, location, cave, desert, home, community center, forest, monastery, mountain, temple. So for different practices, different things are important. For yogi, of course, nothing like the location doesn't really matter. But of course, it's relative. If the practitioner is new, right, it will be difficult to meditate in a place where everybody's talking and like it's a butcher, I don't know, place. It would be more easier to meditate in nature, but it's all is relative here. 8. Aesthetics and material culture, architecture, art, clothing, paraphernalia, so external things. Larger system, anthropology, cosmology, dietetics, ethics, psychology, ritual, textual study, soteriology, I have personally no idea what that is, and theology, which is the study of the Word of God. Yeah. Again, lots of kind of categories here. There's Taoist, internal alchemy, there's Dominican Catholic prayer, Eastern Orthodox prayer, Hindu classical yoga, Hindu kirtan, Ignatian Catholic, Jewish Kabbalah, modern Christian, Pure Land, Pure Buddhist, Sufi contemplation, techniqueless meditation, therapeutic meditation, Theravada Buddhist meditation. So there are so many different approaches to do it, and different people will select according to their personality, and there will be different dimensions. Like some of them will be more devotional and mantric, others won't be that. But basically, lots of overlaps are bound to happen. So this is just, I won't read any of this much, but it's just interesting that any of the, like, as we discussed in yoga, there are different dimensions, like 8 limbs that are more or less overlap. And for example, the first are called abstentions or moral restraints, like yama and niyamas, ethical observances. The third one is asana, posture, breath control. We know all of this by now. And interestingly, similarly in Sufism, there is a certain contemplative and mystical strain of they emphasize stages, makam or makamat, which are also referred to as stations. A typical representative map of stages on the Sufi contemplative path includes repentance, abstention, asceticism, poverty, patience, confidence, and contentment. So again, at least here they sound a little bit more rigid, but I guess there will be interconnections, because for example in yoga nobody says to you that you have to be poor. Rather, the principle is more general. It's called non-hoarding, non kind of indulging in amenities which are not necessary for life preservation, because this creates more distraction from the goal, from what truly matters. But then again, okay, I don't want to add any more personal comments, because then we can talk for a while. But this is just some, how do you say, perspectives here. So this is from another book, Meditation Tradition Overviews. So meditative practices have flourished since the founding, and they can be found in the East. This is like more talking about the Eastern spiritualities. They're called yoga, Tantra, Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. I don't want to stop that much on these ones. It's just kind of to give an overall view. And if you're interested in them more specifically, you can read the book. Again, this was a lot of text. I'm not going to go into it, but here is just interesting parallels between the notion of Asian traditions of meditation is in contrast to Judaic, Christian, Islamic, and ancient Greco-Roman traditions stemming from Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. There is no absolute line of division between the two. For instance, it has been persuasively argued that Indian impulses have strongly influenced the Kabbalah of Judaism, the Orthodox Christian Jesus prayer, and the recitative and sometimes musical practices of Dzikr and Sama of Islamic Sufism, and can also be easily argued that the exclusively devotional practices of Sikh Nam Simram are generally more similar to the corresponding European, Middle Eastern, and North African practices than to most Asian forms of meditation. There is the recitative practices of the Jesus prayer and Islamic dhikr display many parallels, not only to Nam Simram, but also to the Indian repetition of mantras and in the East Asian recitation of Buddha names. Similar cross-cultural parallels can be found in the realm of visualization practices. Thus, distinguishing the Asian traditions from European, Middle Eastern, and North African practices is done mainly for practical and heuristic reasons, not because they are typologically distinct. So again, it's just I think it's a similar thing. My personal observation, like in the arts, everything is very much interconnected. Same thing in literature. Lots of stories influence from in one part of the world influence the others. Like technology, everything is much interconnected. So you can, of course, try to analyze and see the differences, or you can see the similarities. Essentially, it's up to you and why you want to do this. So dimensions of meditation include attention, because all forms of meditation deal with attention, object of attention, and states of mind. And we're going to focus more of this when we go into psychology. No need to go in there right now. But Jepesh, or Madhavi, no, I mean, Max, do you want to read this?
Sure, no problem. Nevertheless, both the modern and traditional discourse on meditation is often concerned not only with long-term inner transformation, but also with the more immediate changes in mental state that meditation is often taught to bring about. Certain changes of state are prototypical elements of meditation, even if they are not universally present or part of the definition. The following list is an attempt at providing a summarized overview of psychological, mental, and spiritual states that are typically considered meditative. Arousal reduction, mental absorption, mental clarity, sense of contact with fundamental aspects of reality.
All right. Again, so some of the other meditation practices, I don't want to go too much on it, but it's interesting that they posit other practices similar to meditation alongside meditation. And these include body practices like Hatha Yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. They focus on the body and involve the use of attention and a concern with the inner transformation. However, in addition to static and thus durative postures, they involve sequential rather than repetitive movements and thus differ from the most typical forms of meditation. Traditional martial arts, which are also sometimes claimed to contain meditative elements, have their main focus on external self-defense rather than internal change. Arguably, some of them pursue this goal partially by including techniques for bringing about inner transformation, but like bodily practices, often in a way based on sequential rather than repetitive movements. And I am personally interested in that they posit psychotherapy as a transformative practice, and that it differs from meditation in several respects. First, it presupposes the presence of a therapist, while meditation usually takes place without the active or intervening presence of another person. And second, psychotherapy hardly counts as a technique in our narrow sense, since it is seldom characterized by the durative or repetitive elements typical for meditation. However, that the various forms of guidance often linked to meditation and sometimes considered indispensable for its effect share these other features of psychotherapy. Japesh, can you read this about the different types of meditation, directive and non-directive forms?
Yeah. Directive meditation, suggestive, concentrative, thematic, non-directive meditation. Well, the context is non-suggestive, mental attitude, non-concentrative, meditation, object, non-thematic.
Yeah. Anyways, so this is it. The citations I've used mostly Asian Traditions of Meditation. It's an interesting book. And this one is introducing contemplative studies, which is like the first portion of this is based on. If you're interested, I have like another studies. I haven't used them much, but it's the studies of yoga specifically. But I think it's another it's an overview. So yeah, there are kind of my overview is that everything is interconnected. It's just like a general observation. Lots of similarities there. And some aspects of meditation, which include attention, object of meditation, states of mind, and emotional side to it, seem to be very important in meditation. So let's look at what we will have in the next session, who will be preparing it. While I'm looking, if you have any comments, questions, observations, please go ahead.
I do have some, but I just want you to finish up looking up who does what next.
Yeah. Well, look, you can go ahead while I'm looking.
Okay. In my case, my question is relatively academic. Has there been any large-scale anthropological attempts to, if not fully, but at least attempt to create a large catalog of practices and beliefs specifically for inner enlightenment? Because I feel like you're not the only one who probably notices that there is a lot of connections that are not only cross-cultural, but also cross-temporal. I was wondering if if there was a large-scale attempt at actually classifying all these things, not just by one guy, but by like multiple institutions.
Well, I would say that's what contemplative studies, that's what they do. That's the closest in my personal research that I found. I think this is the closest to it.
Yeah, can
I'm
I
not sure,
comment?
I'm not sure if there is categorization. Yeah, go ahead, Trapesh.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like the city of Alexandria, where I know a lot of the alchemical knowledge. Apparently, before that city was destroyed, it was a culture that basically had these sort of teachings as foundational, and that city was um, destroyed, burned to the ground. And then you have even in Tibet a lot of this Buddhist knowledge of enlightenment. Right, the Chinese went in, destroyed I think like 6,000 temples, and a lot of that knowledge was lost. So I think that there is, a literal battle between good and evil. You have this knowledge of a truth about human existence um, that is um, not suppressed, but you have groups trying to suppress that knowledge, and every once in a while, um, it flourishes, and then it's sort of hidden again. Going through those cycles. How I was introduced to meditation. Have you ever heard of Falun Gong? The
Oh my
Falun.
God, not these guys.
I'm sorry.
I did not hear a lot of good things about the Falun Gong. Not
Well,
a lot.
I mean, on the surface, it's a meditational practice. If you look at what the practitioners engage in, it's very similar to what we do. It gained a lot of momentum. I think close to 100 million followers in China, and that's when the Chinese had to outlaw it. They pretty much banned the practice. They put a lot of the practitioners in jail, tortured them, pretty much made it illegal. Um, but what did you hear about it? About it being,
My knowledge of the Falun Gong is hearsay. I have not verified most of it. But what I did know is that they are running a very interesting dance show that kind of exemplifies a lot of what they do and who they are. They
oh, is that
most
the like the Shen Yun or something?
something like that. And they mostly reside in America now because the majority of them were exiled from the CCP. And their presence is almost cult-like. It's not even cult-like. I think it was officially classified as a cult
Yeah,
because
I mean,
yeah.
I do see, like example, you have, let's just say Christianity at
Mhm.
the source of it, the origins. It's a very spiritual practice that attempts to bring man to an enlightenment of sorts. But then you have sort of countries that have waged war in the name of Christianity,
Yeah.
murdered millions in the name of God, or even like Islam, right? So, at the source, I think it's all very, I don't know the right word, pure. But then as you know, a lot of different people are exposed to it, it sort of gets a little corrupted.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you.
Well, at the source of Falun Dafa, right? Like when you sort of engage in a meditation practice, you go inward. And I know that the system currently is trying to prevent a mass awakening because the system would collapse completely. It's a capitalistic system. Many groups are trying to acquire more power, more control. Any mass spiritual awakening would go completely against that. We would no longer be consumers supporting the system as it is.
And then there's also the fact that a lot of, let's say, spiritual practices kind of exclude the brutal nature of the world where physical violence and strength matters. So if, for instance, you want to protect what the things you believe in and your rights to believe in them, it requires some form of force because the world won't just let you do that. And that goes counter to a lot of the teachings, a lot of things of that nature actually imply, which is again, that's the hypocrisy of the situation. If you want to be peaceful and believe in your ideas, if you're by yourself, usually that's okay. The moment you acquire more followers, people start to notice, and that's a problem. And then you have to make a compromise. Do you let other people influence what you believe to be true, or do you just let yourself be trampled, or you trample others? And it's unfortunately there is no winner here. Anything that is even remotely large always encounters this problem. Would it be Christianity, Buddhism, be it Hinduism, be it Islam, there's always going to be extremes and vice versa. So it's the ideological model that, unfortunately, I don't think there's a way of winning. But an interesting idea, by the way, what you're talking about, Japesh, there is a text that I will link. I think it's called, let me check, because there's a lot of what you're talking about. It's already been explained very well by another person that's way smarter than you would expect them to be based on the history. I think it's called The Industrial Society and Its Future. Look into that text. Although I would recommend using incognito, at least.
Noted. What's the text?
Industrial Society and Its Future.
Yeah, I'll look into it.
So I found some books just from your question, just some quick search on from ChatGPT. I've shared some books here. So they seem to be quite relevant. The first one, I put them on chat and I'll add them on our chat on Telegram. So they talk about different conceptualizations of enlightenment and whatnot and how to achieve it. But just kind of 1 minute from what you said, Max, just because, yeah, it depends because some spiritual traditions, they want to acquire this peace, which is like I forget the word they use, ergological, means like without thought, without content. But tantric approach, for example, that's why I choose to practice it. I still believe that there is this feeling, there is this spirit, not just belief, I experienced that my last 7 years, not unlike time before, it has been time of very huge struggle, physical, lots of mental struggle and spiritual struggle. And this struggle is to know myself, is to know this consciousness and to also find this equilibrium between physical, mental, and spiritual, essentially find for harmony and balance. And this is what Tantra is. It's a fight. And it's, as you said, ideological clash is there and it's always going to be there. And it's not, it will clash with materialistic understandings of life or
It's even more complicated than that, unfortunately, because it will be, there's a lot of cultures around the world that allow other religions inside their culture without any issues. And the main problem is in like being able to understand and actually control your own thoughts, emotions, and be independent in the way you think. That is inherently dangerous for any government or society, because if the society cannot dictate to you how you think and conform, you are a danger to that society, just by definition. And unfortunately, when the vast majority of the population is designed to be mostly just blank slates, and you have too high of a population of intellectuals or spiritual people that think on their own terms, that incentivizes the destabilization of rules and societal norms, which is not.
Well, but that's how change happens, because there is this notion of society. There's Canadian society, say there's like Ukrainian, they say there's Armenian society. But for example, by a person who's like a neo-humanist like Shushan and Nemurti, and when they use the word society, means all humanity. So they're thinking about the on terms of welfare for all human beings. And of course, people like Socrates, people like Newton, people like Shushan and Demurtian, people who are like thinking on the level of humanity and not just one country, one culture, one language. They think beyond that. They think on the level of global community. Of course, some pressure will be applied on what we call society, if we mean by society, a culture that is just based around one country, one culture, one name. Of course, and this is why people who not prophesize, who um, think globally, holistically, interdisciplinary, they are bound to face a lot of clash, and this is good for humanity, not good for them as individuals. There's really good.
Actually, argue that's bad for humanity. There's a reason why Palestine and Israel have a gripe, let's just put it that way. There's a reason why the Mongols were different from the Roman Empire. It's a very long discussion, but it's a very interesting one. I would love to talk about that more when possible.
Yeah, one thing is Tantra is based on the idea that struggle is an essence of life, and thinking about were clashes within the relationships, within families, within communities. It's inevitable. The question is, are we able, kind of having finished this course in conflict studies, the question is, are we able to take them from the battlefield, from the fighting, towards at least mental conflict? It's even
That's the problem.
it's if we do that, that's already better. If we just take it to the spiritual, if we're able to resolve our conflicts by just kind of meditating and then kind of calming down and then having just this mental conversation calmly, that's even better than brawling and fighting. Lots of people in families and communities still want to like do it through that, but there are other ways. We're at 10, so I'll stop recording. I think we've had a fruitful conversation, and next week we will have Max. Max, it's your turn, and you will gonna do session 4 on let me see, science of meditation, neuroscience, biology. Um, yeah, integration of yeah. So mostly neuroscience and biology, and any other branches of hard science that you want to talk about meditation, and use some scientific research on that.
All right, brace yourself. I'm not gonna dice around with the hard science stuff. Hopefully you cannot fall asleep, but I'll make it entertaining at least.
Yeah, you don't need to go crazy. Okay, I'll stop recording.